Today's a good day, my friends. Once again, all my monsters and I welcome you back to Philomania, the channel where together we explore the fascinating universe of collectible pocket knives and all sorts of related species. For this episode, right in front of us, we've got the Medford Infraction, a knife proudly made in the United States. This particular piece has been part of my collection for at least a couple of years now, and it's one that I had been chasing for quite some time. Eventually, I stumbled upon this exact version, not just the model itself, but this specific colorway on eBay. And honestly, the price was more than fair, so I didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. Now, this is a folder, as you can see, with a design that leans toward the futuristic side. Personally, I find it super cool, easily one of the boldest designs in Medford's entire catalog. In fact, out of all the Medfords that exist, and there are plenty of them, the Infraction stands out as my absolute favorite. It also happens to be the only Medford knife I currently own in my collection, which says a lot about how much I appreciate it. Structurally, it's a frame lock, meaning the locking mechanism is integrated directly into the frame itself, as you can clearly notice here. When it comes to deployment, you've actually got options. A lot of people will go for the classic Spidey flick through the cutout on the blade, which works really well. At first, when I first unboxed the knife, I honestly thought that hole was the only way to open it. But after a little bit of handling, I realized it's also designed as a flipper. You can use this little tab right here on the spine of the blade to get a smooth, quick flip, giving you two distinct ways to enjoy the action. Now, let's talk about the actual feeling of the action, what it's like when you flip this knife open. To be completely honest with you, this isn't a particularly fast knife. Does that mean it's one of those snappy flippers where you just touch the tab and the blade rockets out instantly? No, not at all. With the Infraction, you actually need to apply a bit more force than you might expect. As you can see, if you don't commit and give it that little extra push, the blade won't lock up properly. And the reason for that is twofold. First, the blade stock is really thick. It's not only wide, but also pretty heavy compared to many other folders. Second, the knife runs on nylon washers, or at least that's what I suspect. Some might be bronze, but I've personally never disassembled mine to check. In fact, I've never taken it apart for maintenance at all, because Medford themselves advise against opening up their knives unless it's done by them directly. Doing so could void the warranty. That being said, if you look here at the pivot, things get a little interesting. Initially, I thought this model didn't require any sort of special tool for disassembly. I honestly believed you could just use a regular driver, like a Torx. But that was a mistake on my part. The reality is that the Infraction, like some other Medfords, comes with a proprietary Medford pivot, a unique design that requires a dedicated tool produced only by Medford. Some models even use a pivot with 3 small holes in a triangular pattern, which can't be opened with any standard tool you'd find at a hardware store. That's why it's considered proprietary, and only Medford provides the tool to safely service it. So, in this case, even though I originally mentioned it didn't need anything special, that's not true. It does require the specific Medford pivot tool. My bad, but hey, that's part of the learning curve when you're handling these unique knives. And speaking of warranty, Medford clearly states that their knives really don't need to be taken apart by the owner. They prefer you don't touch the internals, and in fact, they'll tell you not to open them at all, because once you do, you're basically on your own if something goes wrong. Of course, I've pretty much ignored that advice. Whenever I feel like giving the Infraction a little love, my go-to choice is a spray of WD-40. Yeah, I know that might surprise some of you. In fact, I'm sure a few people watching right now might cringe at the idea, but honestly, it's my preferred oil for pocket knives. It works beautifully, both as a lubricant and as a cleaner. The WD-40 cuts through rust, dust, and those tiny particles of grit that inevitably sneak into the action. Every time I spray it on and wipe the knife down, it feels refreshed, almost like new again. Now, let's be fair. Even with maintenance, this isn't the kind of knife that's going to give you that ultra-snappy, lightning-fast action. That's just not its personality. However, that doesn't mean it's bad. Far from it. It just requires you to experience it in hand to really understand what it offers. Especially when the knife is brand new, straight out of the box, before the pivot has had time to break in with regular use, you'll definitely notice it feels a bit stiff, almost resistant when deploying the blade. And here's the kicker. If you do need to service it and loosen things up, you'll absolutely need the special Medford pivot tool I mentioned earlier. Without it, you won't even be able to open it up. So in that sense, the Infraction stays very true to the Medford philosophy. Rugged, overbuilt, but also a little bit exclusive in how you maintain it. This Medford comes with a drop-point blade, as you can clearly see. The spine gradually slopes downward toward the tip, giving it that classic drop profile. Now, when it comes to the grind and finish, I'd say it looks machine-applied, or at least that's what it seems to me. But honestly, it could also be done by hand. Take a look at those visible lines across the blade. That's what you typically get from a belt sanding process. It leaves behind that distinctive look, almost industrial, as if the blade had just rolled off a precision machine. But the truth is, you can also achieve this finish manually by working the blade against a sanding belt with a microgrit surface. On the other hand, larger shops often replicate the same aesthetic using fully automated equipment. Either way, the result here is beautiful, and it gives the knife a rugged, almost futuristic vibe without going overboard into sci-fi territory. Another interesting detail is the milled relief cut along the blade, which probably helps shave off a bit of weight while also adding character. It's subtle but aesthetically pleasing, and again reinforces that futuristic design language that the Infraction seems to embrace. Now, let's look at the deployment cutout. The hole on the blade is actually quite large, big enough that I can almost fit the tip of my index finger through it. That makes opening the knife a lot easier. I can use my index finger, or even flick it open with my middle finger in a Spidey flick. And as I mentioned earlier, there's also the flipper tab, which works just fine. At one point, I even wondered if it could function as a front flipper. Technically, you might think so until you realize it doesn't have any jimping on the spine. That means there aren't those small grooves or ridges that normally provide traction for your thumb or index finger when trying to roll it open from the front. Without that extra grip, a front flip action just doesn't work here. And no matter how you try it, I honestly don't think this knife was ever designed to be open from that particular angle. Even though at first glance it might look like it, in reality, that feature is purely cosmetic. It's simply part of the blade's finishing, very well executed, I might add, but it doesn't serve any functional purpose for deployment. Moving on to the handle, the scales are made of titanium, and in this case, they've been blue anodized. I've had this knife for about 2 years now, and the color has held up remarkably well. There's been only a slight fading, mostly in the areas where your hand makes the most contact, like along the edges and near the lock bar. Over time, those high contact points lose a bit of the anodized layer, creating a natural wear pattern. But honestly, that's part of the charm. I don't want a knife to just sit on a shelf looking perfect all the time. A little wear tells the story of use, and in a way, it adds to the knife's character. On the reverse side of the blade, you'll notice some markings. This particular version isn't from the very first Infraction run, it's an updated model. You'll see the Medford logo etched onto the blade, and right next to it, the S stamp, which in this case indicates that the steel is CPM S35VN. Now, S35VN is a very solid steel. It's well known for having excellent edge retention and being highly resistant to corrosion qualities that make it ideal for an EDC-style folder. In terms of toughness, I'd place it in the medium to high range. It's not quite at the level of modern super steels like MagnaCut or M390, which push performance further, but S35VN is still extremely reliable and more than capable of handling anything you'd reasonably throw at a knife like this. So, let's compare it for a moment with steels like MagnaCut or M390. Sharpening S35VN is noticeably easier. It's more manageable, more forgiving. Unlike MagnaCut or M390, those steels are absolute beasts, almost like sharpening a rock. With them, you need serious patience, high-quality stones, and a lot of persistence to get a proper edge. By contrast, S35VN is far more user-friendly when it comes to maintenance, which is something I personally appreciate. Now, don't get me wrong, S35VN is still a premium-grade stainless steel. It's not some budget option. It was first introduced in the early 2002, if I recall correctly, around 2003 to 2006, and it's American-made. For years, it's been a staple in the world of high-end production knives and even in custom knife making, precisely because it offers a balanced mix of toughness, corrosion resistance, and edge retention. Of course, as metallurgy has advanced, newer steels have entered the scene with more complex alloy compositions and even higher hardness levels. That's why MagnaCut and M390 outperform it in some categories. They're tougher, harder, and they'll hold an edge longer, but they're also much more demanding to sharpen. What makes S35VN particularly attractive, in my opinion, is its chromium content. It has a relatively high level of chromium in its alloy, which not only helps with corrosion resistance, but also gives the blade a slightly brighter, shinier appearance compared to other steels. Now, don't expect it to sparkle like polished silver. It's a subtle sheen, but it does give the knife a distinctive look, a kind of muted brilliance that makes it stand out. On the back side of the knife, you'll notice the presence of a stop pin. Now, what exactly does a stop pin do? Its purpose is to limit how far the frame lock can travel when the knife is opened. Without a stop pin, the frame lock bar could potentially overextend. That would mean that, when closing the knife, the lock would no longer engage deeply enough with the blade, sometimes barely making 15% contact with the tang, which would compromise the security of the lock. In the case of the infraction, the engagement is much stronger. Right out of the box, you can see the lock bar engaging at about 40% of the blade's width. And when you apply pressure by gripping the handle firmly, your fingers naturally push the frame lock just a bit further inward, increasing engagement closer to 50%. This gives you a reliable, secure lockup every time. The stop pin is crucial because it prevents the frame bar from creeping further outward with use, something that could otherwise reduce lock security over time. It's a small detail, but an important one for long-term durability and peace of mind. Now, moving further back, we have the pocket clip. Personally, I really like the way it looks. It's a titanium clip finished in a metallic, almost steel-like tone. That natural titanium color contrasts beautifully with the blue anodized scales, giving the knife a clean yet striking two-tone aesthetic. It's functional, but also adds a touch of elegance to the overall design. The same design language carries through to the backside of the knife. And honestly, I really enjoy how it all comes together. Of course, that's a personal preference. It doesn't have to appeal to everyone, but to me, it's very satisfying. Even the small details like the hardware choices make a difference. The stop pin, the pivot, the backspacer, and the pocket clip all combine with the blue anodized titanium scales to form a simple, cohesive color palette. It gives the knife not only a sense of toughness, but also a touch of elegance and sobriety. That's actually why, for this video, I chose to shoot it against a soft mustard yellow background. It creates just the right amount of contrast, so you can really appreciate the way the slightly chromed finish of the blade plays against the blue-violet hues of the anodizing. The colors pop without being overwhelming, and you can clearly see how the materials complement each other. You'll also notice a small lanyard hole near the back of the handle. For those of you who like to accessorize your knives with a lanyard, this Medford has you covered. It's a practical addition, and for collectors who enjoy customizing the final look of their knives, it's a nice touch that opens up more personalization options. And of course, it's worth repeating. Medford is an American brand through and through. Their niche in the knife market is very clear. They build heavy-duty knives. We're talking about tools that are overbuilt, thick, solid, and unapologetically robust. If you look up Medford models online or ask your favorite AI to pull up some images, you'll quickly notice the pattern. The vast majority of Medfords are big, chunky, and made to last. That's part of their DNA as a company, and the infraction, despite being one of their slimmer models, still carries that unmistakable Medford attitude. That aesthetic, the bold, overbuilt look, has been part of Medford's identity since the very beginning, and it's worked extremely well for them. Unlike other brands and designers who chase the featherweight trend, aiming for knives so slim and light that you barely notice them in your pocket, Medford deliberately goes in the opposite direction. And that's exactly what I enjoy, because it aligns perfectly with my own taste. Medford knives are meant to feel substantial. Take, for example, the Medford Praetorian, one of their most iconic models. I initially called it Predator, but yes, it's the Praetorian. It's also one of my personal favorites, and I've been hunting for the TI version for a while now. TI stands for titanium, but in this context, it also marks the thicker, oversized variant. Even though it's technically a small knife, it's extremely chunky and heavy, almost like a pocket tank. That's Medford's philosophy in a nutshell. Now, some people argue that Medfords are more decorative than functional, and their reasoning makes sense. Most Medford knives use very thick blade stock. The downside of that is simple thick blades are rarely excellent slicers. A thin blade will glide through material much faster and with less resistance because it generates less surface friction. With a thick blade, even if you've got relief grinds or milled sections, there's still more material dragging behind the edge. That means cutting tasks like making long, clean slices require more effort. So yes, critics have a point. In terms of pure slicing performance, Medford knives won't beat a super thin Spyderco or a laser-like kitchen knife. But that's not what they're built for. They're built for strength, durability, and presence qualities that appeal to a very specific type of knife enthusiast, myself included. And don't get the wrong idea, a Medford can absolutely cut. Of course it can. Thanks to the thickness and weight of the blade, this thing can handle virtually any task you throw at it. But if what you're after is slicing like cutting cardboard, fabric, or rope, I'd honestly recommend going with a thinner knife. If practicality, speed, and ease of use matter more to you, the Infraction might feel bulky in comparison. That said, if you do choose a Medford with its wide blade and fat handle, you're picking it more for the design than for ultra-quick slicing performance. That doesn't mean it doesn't cut, it just cuts differently. Be mindful, because this is truly a beast of a knife, and if you're not careful, it will do some serious damage. One more thing to point out about the Medford Infraction. As I mentioned earlier, there's no jimping, none at all, neither up top nor at the rear. The spine and handle are completely smooth to the touch. Holding it feels like handling a precision tool. There's an undeniable sense of smoothness, delicacy in its design, but also an undercurrent of aggression in its build. The design itself is really about balance. It manages to combine comfort and smoothness with just the right dose of aggression. You can feel that mix the moment you look at it, and especially when you hold it in your hand. Of course, that also makes it less of a purely utilitarian knife. If you were planning to use it for constant, repetitive cutting tasks, you'd notice one drawback. The handle is so smooth that once your hand gets sweaty, it can slip a little. There are no traction points, no texturing, no jimping on the titanium frame to give your fingers extra grip. But honestly, who cares? That's not what this knife was designed for. The Infraction is very much a collector's piece, perfectly crafted to deliver a unique sensation in hand. It's unapologetically Medford, strong, aggressive, and distinctive, yet refined in its own way. So there you have it, my friends. I hope you've enjoyed this review. For me, the Medford Infraction is one of the absolute standouts in my collection. It's what I call an immovable piece. One of those knives I would never sell, never trade, under any circumstances. It's here to stay. As always, all my monsters and I are happy you stuck with us all the way through this video and got to share this look at the Medford Infraction, this particular version being from around 2023, if I remember correctly. So take care, my friends. Stay safe, enjoy your knives, and above all, peace. We'll see each other in the next episode of Philomania. I can't say exactly when it'll drop, but you know it'll be worth the wait.